Welcome back. I'm Carla Torres, your producer, and we are going to pick up right where we left off last week. Here's part 2 of today's topic.
We're seeing a growing trend with security directors focused on how do we get messaging back into the classroom during the lockdown.
Yes.
And that's an encouraging trend to see is investment and practice in talking back to the classroom if something goes down.
And it's funny that you segued there and brought that up, because it's exactly one of the things that was on my mind. It comes up on a fairly regular basis, is how do we let everybody know when we've shifted gears? Mm-hmm. And from a public safety perspective, obviously the campus is in lockdown. It's in a crime scene. Movement on the campus is not going to be at will. It's going to be very controlled and very, very limited. But I think from a public safety perspective and a response perspective, there is value in getting that voice that's familiar, whether that's the principal or the assistant principal or whoever is normally making the announcements on the PA system, getting them back in front of a PA microphone when you've got the last patient transported and being able to say, here's an update. Campus remains in lockdown. The threat has been neutralized. The injured have been transported. Law enforcement is going to begin moving through the campus to ensure that there are no other threats. Stay where you are. Thoughts?
The 3 greatest challenges in a crisis: communication, communication, communication. And especially with kids and teachers, those are 2 audiences that have wild imaginations, and rarely do they imagine things smaller. And so the more communication we can get into the classroom sooner, again, long term, this is the first step of the recovery process. And that can reduce long-term trauma simply by introducing communication while they're still in lockdown.
Yeah.
Discussions that we're having in our trainings all revolve around this. And it's come up even more. Don't want to go down this rabbit hole right now, like cell phone bans in schools. But how do we communicate that message? When's the right time to do it? Threat is neutralized. 90% of the time, they're over in 10 minutes. We are absolutely moving that school safety needle. Less active shooter events are occurring in schools. Open space is going up, right? All the data is there to support these conversations in the room. But we've got to communicate into the room. But whether it's been in a SSAVEIM, an SRP, SRM, or a REX, the same conversations always come up. A teacher is going to ask, or an educator, administrator is going to ask, who's going to let the classrooms know it's okay? That's why we're here today. I can't go in and tell you what your plan's going to be that day. You should be taking this. We have failed you if we don't leave you with some homework today. You need to go back and you need to have this discussion. How do you communicate? Don't reinvent the wheel. Drive-through reunification is another discussion. I feel like I became very proficient in drive-through reunifications because I don't want to reinvent the wheel. You already have a plan to drop off your students or pick up your students, parents at the school. So let's use some of that if the situation, if the incident allows it. Do you go by PA? Do you have an email? Do you have a text message? How do we get that communication? When's the right time to do it? Have that plan in place and don't wing it, right? That day. Talk about it. When's the right time to do it? And this is one of the other slides that we bring up. And always discussions go both ways. This is one of those where the instructor's got to control the room a little bit. Do you allow your students to text their parents at some point? Now we have a little stake in that game.
Yeah.
Got a dog in that fight.
Yeah.
But recently with some of the cell phone initiatives and bans that are going in school, I always wondered, are we losing a potential tool that we might be able to use? I remember one incident right as I was retiring and trying to track a student. And the simple fact that the parent had the Life 360 app on their phone, we were able to figure out where that student ran off to that day. So there's some benefits to having that, but communication, going back to communication.
And I would, because I agree with you, Kevin, I don't want to go down the cell phone ban rabbit hole, but I'm sitting across the table here from a guy that, like myself, has a very, very strong technology background. John Michael, I know you're done a lot of development, software programming. You're very, very well versed in technology, as am I. It doesn't matter what they do with cell phones. They are not going to shut down messaging. They'll have laptops. They're going to have their watches. They're going to have the genie is out of this. Just get over it and let's move on and sort out, behavior. You're trying to address a behavioral issue by taking away a thing, and I can be quite a distance away from my phone and still have full control on my watch.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter if I put my phone in a cubby hole over there or it's in a locker outside. I can communicate with it. And oh, by the way, I have an app on my desktop, on my laptop computer that will allow me to receive and text message. We're never going to get there. But I do think that we need a plan. And Kevin, I want to follow up on something you said, because we talked about the decline of active shooter events in schools. One of the interesting things, because that's accurate, absolutely true, though you wouldn't necessarily know that listening to the news. But here's where this thing gets a little bit squirrely, and that is the definition of what is or isn't an active shooter event. Here's the reality. It's starting to matter less and less from a response perspective, not from a research perspective. From a response perspective, it's starting to matter less and less whether it was or wasn't an active shooter. The real issue is, how did we react? So, for example, there's a violent encounter between a student and a teacher. We've seen a number of these where students have attacked teachers, and that triggers a lockdown event. And it's a real event. Mm-hmm. And as you said, everybody's going to think bigger, not smaller. Yeah. Not an active shooter event. It was an assault, perhaps a violent one. There may have been one or more serious injuries, not to minimize it at all. But everybody sitting in the classroom, you said you have a school that's got 4,500 kids. Mm-hmm. You got 4,500 kids on lockdown, and it's a real lockdown because it's a real violent event, but it wasn't an active shooter, but everybody's scared to death. And what's the level of reunification that needs to occur after that? Likewise, you have gang violence in schools. You have just the typical bullying that escalates, knife attacks. You may have we've seen a number of these arguments between students that get settled with a gun. Doesn't meet the definition of an active shooter event from a research perspective, but it sure as hell triggered a lockdown, and it triggered a full-scale law enforcement response that might have well been an active shooter event. From your perspective on the foundation, does that flavor any of your thinking as you're moving forward on how you may need to adjust the training or adjust the messaging?
So we introduced the hold action in 2017, 2015.
2015, and then it became...
And then it became part of the protocol in 2017. And it was to really address that differential between a lockdown and let's just keep kids out of the hall. That's part of the answer to the question. But the other part is that, some of the stuff happens. Yes, it's traumatic. Yes, we just went into lockdown. Why? Mm-hmm. If what we've been training is that the lockdown is because there's an active violence event going on inside the building. And so we don't use the term active shooter. We talk about active assailants because it may not be just simply a shooter. And so I'm not sure if I'm getting an answer to your question, Bill, but
well, I think you did kind of touch on it there a little bit. Is if you have a violent event, it's very likely going to trigger a lockdown. At least it should. Mm-hmm. But once enough information is present, to then shift gears and say we are changing from a lockdown to a hold. Mm-hmm. There has been an event. It is under control, but we are in a hold status, and communicating that. I think part of the challenge is I'm not entirely sure that it would occur to public safety, to police, fire, and EMS early on, 10 to 15 minutes in, we've got this under control. There's work to be done here, and we're going to have a presence, and I don't want the kids in the hall, but go do your messaging to switch gear. I don't think we're at that awareness level yet.
We are just starting that, and we've developed training materials specifically geared towards dispatch and dispatch supervision. Let that commander or sergeant perhaps get a gentle nudge from a dispatcher that, hey, this action exists and is an option.
And I think it's also why it's so important to have the diverse audiences that we have, so that if we have our first responders in the room learning about SRP, learning about reunification, then their response can fit and align more with what the school's expecting.
Yeah. Kevin, you and I have both done a number of SSAVEIMs together and independently. And it's always fascinating to me. So our SSAVEIM curriculum calls for 3 exercises, but it seems to be the exception, not the rule, that we actually get to the 3rd exercise, because by the time it rolls around to do the 3rd exercise, there's so many questions, usually coming from the educators, but some from public safety as well. So many questions that we end up spending that 3rd exercise time having that discussion and facilitating these very questions. And some of those questions they're specific about their particular situation, but they're also very pointed questions about, well, how does this work? Because these things seem to be in conflict.
And one of the things I've liked is that we are giving a forum for those conversations that have probably needed to happen for years. Yeah. And then we can find ourselves maybe just kind of stepping back a little bit and allowing people to talk that have needed to talk.
Yeah. If they're able to come up with some of those solutions by having those group discussions, have them.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And let's be honest, it starts pushing 3:30 in the afternoon.
Yeah, the educators are looking for the door.
Yeah, most are checked out at that
and
point.
Cops never want to.
What's the best benefit for the day? Let's air this out, because you have others in the room that may have experienced this before. You may have the 35 student principal there, along with the 4,500 student principal, where somewhere in the middle there, they can communicate to one, hey, this is what we do on our end when we have this, when we have an incident occur. This is how we communicate to our teachers or our educators in the room. We have this secret squirrel email system, notification system, whatever it might be. But open up those conversations, give them some homework, and go back and say, hey, continue this conversation. Don't let it end here.
To watch the mindset change from what it was early in the morning in the room about, wow, we're not going to do that. You know, we have nothing to do with reunification. And then by the end of the day, oh, I see that we do. And so that we can actually be help, not a hindrance. And then the understanding of why from both perspectives, so important.
Yeah. And those questions are valuable. And this is actually something that's recently happened, which for whatever reason wasn't happening for a while. School goes into lockdown, but students are outside. Where do they go to? And you think, okay, we've been having this conversation for 20 years. I'm not saying this negatively. You don't know what you don't know. But we get asked that question a lot. Okay, we just went into lockdown. We heard the loud repetitive bangs inside. Lockdown, we don't go back into school, we evacuate. Or the self-evacuation discussion inside, which leads into the accountability. Having everybody around the table running through the functional exercise allows the opportunity for those questions to come up and for us to say, start in your gym class. Run a drill when students are outside, identify a few places, talk to law enforcement. What's the difference between cover and concealment? Going behind a bunch of shrubs hides you, but it won't stop something from going through that. Brick baseball dugout. Have those conversations start there, because that's now going to lead into your planning. And yeah.
It is amazing. One of my favorite things to see happen, and I've seen this a number of times in our SSAVEIM class, where educators will start asking questions on a driven topic, and the public safety people in the room, to your point, the instructors can kind of just step back. Their local public safety people go, "Oh no, we would approach this way." I remember one very vividly. The educator, the superintendent, announced how law enforcement would arrive and by what means they would arrive and what the process was for them to check in and find this out and find that out. And I'm looking, and all the cops are looking at each other like, what is that?
That's not what's going to happen.
And then, one of the And ironically, it wasn't the chief in the room. It wasn't the lieutenant. It wasn't the sergeant. It was a patrol cop that went, "Yeah, sir, I don't mean to disagree or be disagreeable, but yeah, that's not what we're doing.
Right.
You've got these entrances. We're going to do this. We're going to do this. We're going to do," and it just facilitates this conversation between the local people. And one of the most amazing ones that I saw, they actually recognized that they had some significant gaps. The educators had made some assumptions about what public safety would and wouldn't do. Public safety had made assumptions about what the school would and wouldn't be doing, and they were both off base. And they said, "Ooh, we have some work to do here." And in the room, they designated people in the room to be part of a working group that agreed to start meeting the next day. And I was like, oh my God, that's
mission accomplished.
Mission accomplished.
And
right
it is.
there.
It's like we'd said earlier, we want to leave them better than we found them.
Yeah.
And when you do those things, you've left them better.
Yeah. And again, it's just amazing the amount of discussions that come up, but it leads into these follow-on conversations. One I ran into last week. Talk to me how you do your lockdown drills. Well, time sensitive, right? We just kind of check the doors, look through the window, and go to the right next door. I'm like, you're not opening up the door and reinforcing, hey, he did a great job in here. But if you think violent event, we don't know what that teacher is going to do. And when you open up the door for the first time after a lockdown, and you have that, this is what's going to happen, right? It's going to be the brand new patrol officer that just got off FTO is going to be the first one through a door, and you got a teacher with a chair on the other side of the door because they're prepared to defend their. Even
that
save them
well.
No. But having the opportunity to have those discussions, and that's what I just absolutely love about one of the things that I love about the SSAVEIM class. It allows all those questions to come up, because now for the first time, our teachers, our educators get a chance to see what that first responder response looks like. And some first responders have no idea actually how far the training has gone for the teachers. Yes, lockdown is a common term, but there's a lot of individual tactics type training out there, whether it's run, hide, fight, avoid, deny, defend, ALICE programs, right? You all need to know what training has been going on. So when that officer opens that door for the first time, or an administrator opens that door, or your school safety director opens that locked classroom door, they have an expectation of what might be on the other side. I learned a long time ago, I'm going to announce my presence before I go through the door, because I got met by those doors, golf clubs, and our teacher with a pair of a box cutter in their hand. I'm like, okay, I'm smarter than this. Yeah. This is Detective so-and-so. I'm coming in the room now, and be a uniformed officer. All those conversations come up,
and that's also why we really talk about the importance of training together ahead of time and doing as you drill. So we're going to open the door every time on our drills and have the conversation. A, you get great conversation. But B, you're also, hey, this is what happens every time. So I know when that door opens, it's because administration or law enforcement physically opening the door, and they're going to come talk to us.
Yeah. It's interesting. This is a little bit of a tangent, but it's in my mind absolutely connected. Several months ago, I had an opportunity. There was a young man from local high school that wanted to come interview me about violence in high schools. And we did his interview, and then I turned the tables on him and said, okay, it's my turn. I want to interview you as a student who attends. And it was a fascinating conversation. It was a fascinating conversation. In fact, Carla, can we make sure that we put down in the notes the link to that one? To hear this perspective from a 16-year-old about what they've been taught, and more to the point, what they haven't been taught. He said in his particular school, they do the lockdown, locks lights out of sight. They hide. He goes, now what? And I said, well, what did they tell you to do? And he goes, if the door opens and somebody comes through, you throw a book at them. And he said, I said, well, how'd that make you feel? And he goes, really?
Yeah.
And what are we going to do when we're run out of books? Throw our laptops at the bad guy? Yeah. And that led to this conversation about some things that they can do a little bit differently, but it dawned on me in listening to his perspective as a high school student. And as a high school student's actually done a fair amount of research on gun violence, that we may have prepared public safety. We may have prepared the school. I think we've missed the mark on having a program for the kids.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? Put you on the spot there, John Michael.
Thanks, Bill. We talk about it a little different sometimes. We talk about the specific actions without simulating an event. But part of our conversation is that we actually only have a fraction of time any given school year to have that conversation. And if we can start the conversations early in kindergarten, then we like to say they're rock stars by the time they're in third grade. But we've had some of these conversations with our kids forever and ever. It sounds a little terrifying, but when you catch on fire, Bill, what do? You stop, drop, and roll. Okay. Wait a minute. What's this catching on fire part? Okay.
Yeah. I thought you were going to go for duck and cover, so I'm glad it was a fire joke.
No, but think it is. Fire safety in schools is taught from the very beginning. We've had clear conversations with children about what to do if they literally burst into flames, but we're afraid to talk about this stuff. But the kids have a desire to. They're yearning to. We as adults need to get over ourselves and, that feels uncomfortable, right? And start having the conversations with kids.
And I'll tell you this, if for those of you listening that hadn't had an opportunity to listen to the perspective of a 16-year-old, you really need to go do it. We can't traumatize the children. Are you kidding me? You should hear their perspective. They're like, what is the plan, adults?
Right.
We don't. Do you remember when Abby said to us, we were asking some questions, some pointed questions about what the kids would and wouldn't do. And she gave an interesting answer. And I go, well, wait a minute. Why is that just you? Because you're my daughter and you live with me doing this all the time? And she goes, no, all my friends see it this way too. And I said, well, why? And they said, she said to us, because we don't trust the adults to solve the problem.
Yeah.
And I'll throw this out there sometimes too. If you're in the middle of an incident and a student looks up to you and asks, what do we do? What's the plan? And you don't know.
Oh,
yeah.
We failed.
Yeah.
We failed. Yeah.
But I think if the student has to ask that question to you, to your point about starting this early and just, we're not normalizing violence. We're normalizing the response.
And more than that, also some
them.
critical thinking skills.
Yes.
Right? About, and it translates, the things we learn in school help us throughout all of our life, right? And in our everyday life. And that's what I want for all of our students to learn as well.
Moved to Bailey, Colorado when the kids were in third grade. And I'd grown up west of Denver in Nederland, Colorado, in the mountains. And Bailey's in the mountains. And it was about 3 weeks into the school year. And I've got third graders. And we need to talk about lions and tigers and bears because we live in the mountains. And with mountain lions, you get big. And we got big. And tigers live in India. And when we go to India, we'll talk more about tigers. But with bears, we get small. And we do at Deer Creek Elementary School in Bailey, Colorado, they've got mountain lions on the playground 4 or 5 times a year. Okay. And it was fascinating because Emily looked up at me and said, oh, Dad, they taught us this already at school. Yeah. What to do with mountain lions and bears. And so, yes, we can have conversations even with third graders.
I agree.
Yeah.
Abby was quite young when I started, everybody's heard the whole adage, run, hide, and fight. But from a very young age, I really taught her, you run or fight.
Yeah.
Hiding is not a real option, and you have permission to run. You have permission to leave. You have permission to get out. We talked about all of the ways that can get out, which, in some cases deals with the exits and fire safety and, crawling through windows and that kind of stuff. But it is amazing that if you don't have those conversations ahead of time, you literally can have a normally intelligent high schooler who's almost an adult who doesn't know that it's okay to run away, doesn't know it's okay to crawl out through a window to get out.
Yeah.
They need permission. And I think that's an issue we need to look at.
Yeah.
We talk about it.
Right, we do.
And a couple of things we talk about is even in early age, we can talk about tactics or intel driven. What you do is based on what you know, and your environment ultimately dictates your tactics. Where are we? What's happening around us? And the SRP was really designed as that all hazards institutional response. We can talk about a medical emergency in the hallway all the way up to the active violent event. We talk about the power of a locked door. And I'm going some here with this. We talk about the Sandy Hook Commission. Number one recommendation, classroom doors should be able to lock from the inside. We've added in with gross motor skills. We know what happens to the mind and body under stress. But we also still need to prepare to evade, defend, run, hide, fight, avoid, deny, defend, all those individual tactics. But in the planning process, we need to have this discussion. What works for your community? What do you feel comfortable with talking to your students about? Because they need to know what the options are. Because it also ultimately leads into the accountability piece. If you are going to self-evacuate, where are you going? Cover concealment, who are you going to call to? All of it ties together. When law enforcement responds, we need to know if it's an area, and I've come across this, and it's been some 120 really good evaluations and 2 that probably never want me or some of our instructors back in their state again because they just teach everybody to evacuate.
Yeah.
Just go. Evacuate, evacuate, evacuate. Well, where's the threat? We need to expand on that conversation. There's not a one cookie cutter response for any of this. So teach the value, the power of the locked door. We've only found 3 incidents where an active shooter has breached a locked classroom door. Or I'm sorry, has entered, that we've lost somebody on the other side of a locked classroom door. It wasn't by the door itself. It was through the windows, and Parkland, nobody entered the classroom. So we talk about that because we really believe that we should be sharing this data and intel, and it should help steer where the training should go towards. And you need to have an understanding of what both sides are going to be doing. What are you teaching your students? What are you teaching your staff members? Give those educators the opportunity to see what it looks like from the first responder response. Yes, there are contact teams that are coming in. There are rescue task force programs, whatever they look like locally. There is all this stuff that's been planned out, but we all need to know and be on the same page before the incident happens. Have these conversations ahead of time.
I think there's also incredible value in not being afraid to have what on the surface seems like a difficult conversation. And I'll give you a perfect example, the Covenant school shooting. That principal who tragically lost her life believed in preparing and didn't pull any punches. And the training with the teachers and the students included critical thinking on which side of the buildings they should egress and evacuate to based on the nature of the threat, the cover that was available, that specific campus design, the construction of the building. They'd had those conversations, and it saved lives. It saved lives. It's just like teaching kids first aid. This is how you control bleeding. These are the things that you can do. And I've literally had some adults say, you can't teach kids that, it's too traumatic. Well, I vehemently disagree. I don't think teaching people things is traumatic. But the funny reality, ironic reality, we equip law enforcement officers with tourniquets across the country. And in large part, it had to do with response to shootings and in many ways to active shooter events for them to be able to rescue. And while there have been some saves, there have been far more lives saved by those officers using tourniquets in car accidents, in traumatic events, in machinery incidents, in situations where people were injured and hurt that had nothing to do with violence.
Right.
But they knew the skills, and those skills are transferable.
And I was just going to say that the events are going to happen regardless. to me, it would be far more traumatic to have the event occur and not know what to do versus, hey, I have a plan. I know what to do, right? Yep. So the event's going to happen anyway. Let's establish a basic understanding for
exactly.
everyone. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, and that's actually an interesting notion from a community perspective. And I'll give you an example. After Casey graduated from college, he did a year with AmeriCorps, and the program he was working on was called EMS Academy. And he was recruiting kids from the inner city, from the community. The program then paid those kids to learn how to become an EMT. And we would start to get EMTs that reflected the nature of the community, the diversity of the community. But in talking to one of these kids, I was out visiting Casey, and she looked at me and she said, you know, I thought my career was McDonald's. This gave me a whole different perspective. Mm-hmm. When I'm done with this EMT program, I'm going to work a year, but I'm going to get into a nursing program. And it was a pivotal change by giving her some of that training, not just in the ability to respond, but the outcome of some life choices. Mm-hmm. And so it's training that may make a pivotal difference in the future vector path of a kid.
I couldn't agree with you more. I got my start in this career at age 13 by becoming an explorer. Now, it was a law enforcement explorer post, but it was with a police department that was a public safety department. Mm-hmm. So their officers were cross-trained to do police, fire, and EMS. And at age 13, I learned some pretty advanced medical stuff. I got my CPR rating. I learned how to do bleeding control, do airway management, do all of those things. And at age 15, I was doing ride-alongs with police officers every waking moment that I could get somebody to let me in the car, and had the opportunity to gain some amazing experiences, life experiences, things like that, opened my eyes to what was possible, ultimately led me to falling in love with this career and wanting to do it as a lifelong career. But for somebody to suggest to me, who actually walked this walk and lived it, learning about this stuff at 13 and seeing some pretty horrible things, mm-hmm. You go to a ride-along program, mm-hmm. you're going to see some horrible things if you see enough of it. And to suggest that kids can't handle that, it's too traumatic. Sorry, no.
No, we're not preparing them for real life.
Yeah. I think we can do better. How about you?
We are doing better.
Absolutely. There's always opportunities for improvement. Thank you all for being here again and talking about this exciting opportunity. So Rex and SSAVEIM, we'll make sure that we put some links to the various programs down in the show notes for people. Thank you to Carla Torres, our producer, for keeping us on time and squared away. And until next time, stay safe.